My name is Jason Baczynski. I'm the Director of Security at CDPHP. So what I have here is a slide about APTs and EREs, and I'll tell you what those are, and basically some of the commonalities, and really what we're going to boil down to with my bait and switch of the title and the topic is talking about CDSS and how that actually helps people if we would only pay attention. So, before we begin, APTs. These are the fun things that everybody knows about that gets written up in all the fun articles. You have things like Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear and Deep Panda and other types of fun names that all these groups get. Panda means it's from China. Basically, if it's got bear in it, it means it's from Russia. Just the code names I've used for kind of these coordinated, typically government-sponsored hacking groups that do very bad things. What they look like in real life? Well, here you go. 2014, if any of you remember that, this was the indictment issued by the FBI against, I think it was 5 members of the Chinese military. They named them by names. They had the footage showing them going into the same building every day, and they knew the IP address of the building. They saw them directly hacking. They indicted them. I don't remember which Panda group this was, but it's an APT group. It's what they do. It's a real life. So what does an APT actually do? Well, the advanced is the key thing. I mean, really, this term came about when RSA got hacked and somebody figured out how to take their seed keys for their two-factor encryption. But you think of it as somebody who's doing heavy reconnaissance. They know who their target is. They're going to figure out everything that they can about them. They're going to develop a zero-day that they can exploit. If you're familiar with Stuxnet or any of those things, that's the United States being an advanced persistent threat, developing 0 days to use against a target to be able to get things. So you have a vulnerability that no one's ever seen, the vendor doesn't know about. They're attacking the supply chain, right? Our speaker this morning, she mentioned MEDOX or MEDOX, I don't remember which way you say it, which was that Ukrainian TurboTax software, basically, which is what ended up destroying Maersk and FedEx and the drug company Merck, and a bunch of other people with that NotPetya thing. So this is what they do. Now they do those heavy advanced things, the advanced reconnaissance, developing 0 days, but they also are going to get you if you're doing stupid stuff. They're going to send you your phishing credential, your phishing email that's got nothing in it, that's just trying to get you to click. They're going to try your default credentials or your dumb passwords, and they're going to use the known exploits that are out there that all of us know of that are out there as well. So that's in general the APT, just very condensed. What's an ERE? Well, I like this word, ephemeral rogue entity. I saw these 3 words next to each other on a vendor slides, and I thought it was a great way to call it. Instead of saying script kiddie or your 400-pound hacker, you got an ERE. It's way more fun, sounds cooler, so I'm hoping it catches on. My Wikipedia page has not been accepted yet for being published. What is it? It's a ghost, right? It's somebody who's there, who's going to pop up once in a while, who's going to do something. You're going to see just kind of that basic attack. So the characteristics that I say of an ERE, right, it's ephemeral. It's there and it's gone. It's nobody with a particular vendetta or a particular target. They just may be combing across things. They're doing some reconnaissance, a nice little basic Shodan search for a default password. Hey, here's a site that says that came up on Shodan. Let me try and sign in. And wow, all of a sudden I'm a super elite hacker. Or, doing those login attempts with the hardcore things like admin and password with a 0, which we know stops every nation-state actor, right? No, I mean, this is dumb stuff, but this stuff that anybody can do. The script kiddie, the 400-pound guy, Blinky from Pac-Man, he can hack you with all these things. And, or just kind of your basic stuff. You've got your typical command or directory traversal trying to take over a server. IIS has had that patched for 12 years, more, but people still are vulnerable to it, and they still use it. Or just, your wonderful things like Metasploit, the previous version had autopwn, which is a great way to just run every single vulnerability you possibly could against the site and try and take over it. You didn't need any skill. My son was sitting there watching a YouTube video, could have done it. It's not a big deal at all. So, we have both of these groups, and there are commonalities. If you got a bad password, they're going to use it against you, but I'm not going to talk about password hygiene because we should all be doing that well these days. But they all are going to use vulnerabilities against you. The thing that I find remarkable is how many vulnerabilities, I got to go through this, what a vulnerability is, just assuming getting that base level of knowledge. It's a way to basically a weakness in software which can be exploited to make that software do something other than it was designed for, right? And if it's got it's got software in it. I mean, everything like outside of our shirts these days, it seems, has software in it, right? And there is no such thing as a vulnerability-proof system. No amount of logic or security that you can do is going to prevent a human error from leaving something vulnerable, or somebody discovers, how about that for a combination of words? Somebody discovers a new type of attack, a new methodology, and all of a sudden all these things that you thought were secure for years now have this vulnerability that that can be exploitable. And really it's just a weak link in the chain. Software could be great, it's got one little deficiency, and it's just like that twisted up paperclip in that chain, and it's going to break. This is a slide that I was thinking of. This is from USCERT. If you know who USCERT is, the Computer Emergency Response Team in the United States. I think they're part of DHS these days. They publish every week a lot of vulnerabilities. This is from 2017, because 2017 is done. There were about 14,000 total published on that site that year. Not every vulnerability makes it to USCERT. Not everybody discloses to them. They don't publish. If they don't get it disclosed to them, they don't publish it. So it requires vendors to communicate to them. So that number was probably higher in 2017. Through July, so through last month, we were already up to 12,000 in 2018. So a lot more vulnerabilities being disclosed, whether that's because people are more aware of vulnerability disclosure and communicating what this is, or just people are getting worse at writing code. I don't know, probably just more people disclosing because it has gotten more press and more news. So we have all these vulnerabilities, but then that doesn't necessarily mean that you're screwed, mean that the 400-pound dude is getting into your systems. What that needs is an exploit. And an exploit is a way to take advantage of that vulnerability and then use it for your own wonderfully evil purposes. And again, not all vulnerabilities have exploits. There were those 14,000. There are a lot of them that no one has a workable exploit for. They haven't figured out how to use that vulnerability to find a way to take over or misuse or adjust or destroy that system. So not all vulnerabilities have exploits. And not all are easy to perform. Some, yeah, 3 or 4 commands. Somebody pulls it off of a YouTube thing and watches it and types it in. Some of them are really hard. You gotta know what you're doing. You gotta decompile systems and do it. But a lot of these things end up getting published once people figure out how to do it. They're gonna share their knowledge with the world. One of the more fun sites for that is ExploitDB. This is again from 2017. This shows how many exploits were published on ExploitDB in 2017. So you saw we had over 14,000 vulnerabilities published. We have 2,000 exploits. Now again, we don't assume that ExploitDB is comprehensive, right? There are people who are going to have their exploits who they're going to keep them to themselves. They're going to publish them on another site. Might be sitting up in GitHub or something like that. That doesn't mean that it's on ExploitDB. But you can see that there is really a difference here, right? You know, so every vulnerability doesn't have an exploit, but a lot of them do. A lot of them do. And that's where it becomes really important when it comes to figuring out what to prioritize and what to take care of. So, question is, what do we do? I like that meme. I like memes. I had to take some out because too much copyrighted content, but here we go. So, I don't know. Well, to go to the bait and switch part of my talk, how about AI? I use this is a bottle I have on my desk. It's from a company called Fake Security. Guy Francis Keys, he makes these things, he shows up at conferences. It's a snake oil, right? It's actually called Fake Security Extract of Artificial Intelligence, right? And it's kind of a snarky take at things because you can preach that you can use AI to solve every single thing in the world, and I'm sure somebody could come up with some incredibly advanced AI system that knows everything about all of your computer systems, everything about all the vulnerabilities and all the exploits out there and all the remediations, and magically takes care of it. But I don't believe in magic. And right now, that's what a lot of those artificial intelligence things really are in the security space, at least in my opinion. I should have put that disclaimer, these opinions are mine, not those of my employer, yada, yada. So we have that. Now, the other thing is everybody says that blockchain fixes everything. Well, if you were at DEF CON last week or you watched the kickoff, the keynote by Larissa Tabriz, she had this slide that popped up there real quick. You know, blockchain isn't going to solve everything. It's a cryptographically based distributed ledger. I don't know how that fixes software vulnerabilities. In fact, blockchain itself and some of the cryptocurrencies based off of it have had plenty of vulnerabilities, and blockchain fundamentally has some that are just the way it's built. So blockchain is not going to solve your software vulnerability problems. Really, what's going to solve it? Yeah, patch all the things. So those of you who are here today, you're at ANYCON. It's a security and hacking conference. There's no excuse for not having all your stuff patched, right? You've got your router at home, your firewall at home. Check the manufacturer's website and put the latest firmware on it. Run Windows Update, run apt update, run whatever tool that Apple uses. Find a third-party tool that'll check all your browsers and all the components that you downloaded and keep them up to date, or check on them and keep them up to date yourself. It's really not that hard when you're dealing with your own stuff, even your tablets and your phones. Buy a phone from a vendor who actually practices responsible patching and releases an updated OS for it more than once every 14 years, or more than just at the release, which there are some that do. You want someone who's going to maintain it, who's going to, when Google releases their pile of latest Android vulnerabilities, which, as someone who reads every single US CERT bulletin can tell you, there is a lot of, you want that to be applied to your phone. You want to be protected. There's a lot of stuff on there. So just patch all of your things, really, is what it boils down to. Now, the problem with that is we can't always do that, especially in a corporation. If you work for a business, you don't have the resources to patch everything all the time. It causes too much business disruption. There's other complaints about it, which I'll get to later. But it really talks about, you need to understand your surface area, understand what the riskiest things are for you, understand what's exposed to whom, understand the threat vector, how that attack could actually be exploited. Is this something that can be someone over the internet can get you with, or is it somebody that somebody's going to actually have to physically plug in something to your computer to take advantage of? Knowing all those differences can make a huge difference in what you prioritize and what you decide to patch. And really, that's why there's the CVSS scoring system. So this is the data copied and pasted right off of first.org, which has all the details, has all sorts of stuff to read about CVSS, and can teach you a lot of good things about it. And what I'm going to try to do here is go through at a really quick level what the key things are in that and how that can help you to be able to prioritize what's going on. But really, it's an attempt to put a numeric value on your vulnerabilities, with 0 being not a vulnerability and 10 being really, really, really bad, and giving you that kind of just general idea of what to do. But knowing the components of what gets you to that 10.0 can help you make a more informed decision about what you want to patch and what you want to patch when. So, right, CVSS 2.0 is still in use widely. That's actually what US CERT defaults to when their scoring is 2.0. Some of the numbers that our keynote speaker gave this morning were CVSS 2.0 numbers. They are different from 3.0. There's a different formula. I think 3.0 is more better, right? It's one better, so clearly it's better. 0 is not a vulnerability, and you might see this on a lot of vulnerability disclosures. It's a cool little link that basically passes through all the vectors of a vulnerability and passes it through to a calculator sitting on NIST, because NIST is the source of all things good, and gives you that scoring. So what does it look like? Here we go. This is a 10.0, as you can see. So we'll run through each one of these really quickly just to explain what they're for. The first one is the attack vector. Worse is on the left, better is on the right, or harder to exploit is on the right. So network means somebody, if it's got a network connection, it can be exploited. So if your computer is connected to the internet, connected to other computers, it can be exploited over the network by someone just hitting your IP address, basically, and finding that vulnerable component. It can be exploited. Obviously, that's the worst one, because then you're exposing up to just about anybody, right? Next one is adjacent. So this is really about someone who's being on a local broadcast subnet, or it would also apply to Bluetooth vulnerabilities, things like that, that personal area network type of thing. So you don't necessarily have to be on the computer itself, but you can't get to it, say, from Russia and exploit your computer sitting here in Albany. You have to be somewhat, in the same broadcast domain and the subnet, things like that to be able to exploit. So you can see the difficulty of exploiting it's gotten a little bit harder. Next one, local. Well, you got to be physically on the keyboard, a user on the system interacting with something to get it exploited. And then physical, well, that means you actually have to have physical access to the box or some type of component that it is. And physical, in security, we know if someone's got physical access in general, it's game over anyway, because there's only so many mitigations that you can do before you render it into just a nice little block, right? Attack complexity. This is purely qualitative by whoever decided to score this vulnerability. Low means it's really easy to do. High means it's really hard to exploit. Just that simple. Privilege is required. None. So this is where it's bad. This is where an anonymous user, say over a network, someone can just hit, say on a web server, it was a web server that was vulnerable, someone can just hit port 80 and do whatever bad thing that they want to do. Low would mean that they would need the credentials of just kind of a general user. So like John Doe signing into a system, signing into a Windows computer, doesn't have administrative access, but he has some access. Thus, it's that low privilege required. High would mean the only way to exploit that vulnerability is with root or God access, or whatever you want to call it. So you can see, really easy to much more challenging, hopefully. Hopefully you don't have an administrator with a password of 0, like the one talk I went to yesterday talked about. That's not good either. User interaction, none versus required. So none, again, is where it gets really scary. It's where someone's just hitting that web server, and just by them hitting it, no one on the system has to do anything, and it can be exploited. Or required is really where this is common in a lot of vulnerabilities with web browsers. You have to trick someone into opening an infected web page, right? That would be the interaction required by a user. You can't just, because they have a vulnerable version of Firefox in their computer, take it over. You have to trick them to opening up that malicious web page, that malicious script, that malicious PDF document or whatever. So again, really risky, not as risky. The ones on the right flip that entirely. The scope is kind of, I think, the hardest one to understand. So changed or unchanged. So for example, if it's a vulnerability in a web browser, if that vulnerability only affects that web browser and doesn't let you to escape into the operating system, that scope is unchanged. The target is the web browser, it stays in the web browser. If that vulnerability then lets you to somehow take over the operating system as a result, well then you've changed the scope. It's gotten outside of that scope of just that one application, and it's expanded it to a larger area than just that one application that's vulnerable. So you can see where that's going to make a big deal too. If it's just a simple PDF vulnerability that only lets you, crash Adobe Reader, if it lets you take over the computer and get system credentials on your Windows PC, well, that's a change of scope. That's a big deal. And then you have your CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Right? Confidentiality is what you want private, staying private. So no impact means it can't reveal private stuff. Low can discover little. High, game over, it knows everything. Same thing with integrity. None means it can't change the learning process, can't change any of the data that you have. Low means a little, and high, again, game over, it can change whatever it wants. It's very rare that you see one of those at high and the other at none. It's just happens, but it's rare. Availability, is your system running or not? So if it's going to slow your system, it's going to be a low. If it's going to crash your system, it's going to be a high. So that's generally CVSS 3.0 in 5 minutes. And if you want to read the entire, 80-page PDF on first.org, it's wonderful reading. Then there's the temporal score. This is one of the new things that CVSS 3.0 added in. This is one that not a lot of vendors actually disclose when they disclose the vulnerability. And it's also one that gets maybe misused the most. It's temporal, it's that point in time. So at the time that someone publishes this with a temporal score, this is about the exploit that's out there for it. So you've got a vulnerability. That's what that previous one was about. This is the temporal. Is there exploit code out there, right? So not defined. No, we don't know of anybody who's exploiting it. Unproven means somebody slaps some code up there, no one's proven that it works, It could just be garbage, or it could be just, be totally useless. Proof of concept, again, looks like it's out there. Someone showed this kind of in an academic setting, but we're not sure if it can really be weaponized, right? If I set up my system just right, I can show how to exploit this vulnerability, but I don't know if it's really going to work on an actual system. Functional means that, yep, there's something out there, it's on exploit DB, it's really repeatable. And high means it's going on all the time, be scared, okay? Remediation level, again, not defined, means that we don't know if there's a fix out there. Official fix, right? The vendor's released a fix, it's out there. There's a temporary fix, there's a workaround, unavailable, right? So you can kind of see the different levels of this. And what this score actually does, let me go to actual report confidence. Report confidence is there, how confident are we on these two items above it, really? Not sure, don't know, I don't know why they break that. The explanation of why those two are different don't make any sense to me, so I'm going to ignore that. Reasonable or confirmed, right? The problem with the temporal score is that a lot of vendors, one, don't even publish this with their vulnerabilities. Second, they only publish it at the date that that vulnerability was disclosed, right? So I have my wonderful Apache struts vulnerability that I just disclosed, that somebody just disclosed Wednesday, right? Apache may not have known about exploit code when it was out there, if they even used the temporal score on their vulnerability disclosure. So it's going to look great. And when you change these scores, actually, let me show that. I think that's my next slide. Right. So here we have a 7.4 up at the top. The temporal score works off of that base score as a top. So if you have this when you see unproven, but there's an official fix, unknown confidence of any exploits. So because of these three factors, it's taking that 7.4 and turning it into a 5.9. So it's even a lower risk. Now, as soon as there's a vulnerability, or an exploit out there that's confirmed, that's reliable, that's in the wild, all those scores are going to shift, and that's going to go back up to a 7.4. So you can see how the time matters, right? If I release that temporal score today, it doesn't talk about what happened tomorrow, or the next day, or the next day. So if you rely just on that temporal score at that point in time, it can be very misleading. You might think, hey, this was a 7.4. It made it to that high, nice little red color, but nothing really out there. It's a 5.9. Well, tomorrow something changed. Now it's a 7.4. It's where the only really fix for that is being aware of what's going on. The fun part, yes, is the environmental score. This one's cool because this one is for you. So this one has all of the exact same numbers that we had on the previous one. All of those same exact components that are in your base score and in your temporal score, but it lets you tweak them, right? So I'll pick on Adobe Reader again. Adobe Reader, typically the exploits require you to open up a malicious PDF, right? So you got to get the malicious PDF to the user, they have to open it, then bad things can begin to happen. So it usually doesn't make it all the way to a 10.0. Now what if you built a system that has something crazy where someone can run Adobe Reader on your PC by going through some type of web form that you have published in a web browser where anybody can get access to it. All of a sudden, anybody can open that malicious file and have it executing on your computer. So whereas that, let's see, which one is it? Oh, sorry, the scope, there we go. Or not the scope, actually. The attack vector typically would be local because you would have to open up that thing. You've got this wacky system built where anybody can run Adobe Reader on your computer from the internet. Now that attack vector hit network. All of a sudden that's changing the scores of it. You might have a system or something that's built that typically doesn't have, that a lot of people use for sensitive data. Maybe you're just using it to have a picture, just one single picture hosted, right? A high confidentiality requirement might be what they typically assume. If you don't care if it's disclosed with anybody, you're going to take somebody's CVSS scores and you're going to modify, well, I don't really care about the any impact of the confidentiality. So it's going to lower the score for you. So you can use this in your various circumstances of how you have software being deployed and change that, and you can say, oh wow, the internet's saying this one's an 8.6. In my circumstance, this is really a 3.2. Or the internet's saying that this is a 5.6, but because I've done something super cool, now it's a 10.0 and I have to do something. So again, these tools are all sitting there on first.org, totally free to use. I'm not endorsed by them in any way, I should add that too. But it's a great way to be able to tell how the vulnerabilities matter for you. So just for an example, we're going to run through two vulnerabilities real quick, and then I'm going to get to NHS and Equifax. So first one, I'm going to pick on Internet Explorer. You see this one got a 4.3. This was a vulnerability that allowed someone to, if they could get someone to open up a malicious web page in their browser, they could get information about other sessions that are controlled by that browser process, right? So it's bad, it's got some information disclosure, right? Low confidentiality impact, you're only going to get things in other browser sessions. They can't do anything with the computer. They can't crash your browser, so no integrity impact, no availability impact. User interaction required. You got to get someone to do that web page. Network exploitable, right? Because it can be delivered over the network because you're going to a web page, which are typically exploitable remotely. Attack complexity low. It's not hard to make a web page that exploits this. Privileges required, right? You don't really need anything to do it, just a browser running. So you see, and unchanged, it doesn't actually escape the browser. So it's a 4.3. Internet Explorer has lots of vulnerabilities, lots of them that score high. This one didn't. Do you care in your organization or on your own computer if you patch this? Probably. You know, it's good to patch everything. When I looked at this one, again, Temporal Score, no exploits on it whatsoever that I could find. So there's not really much of a threat by not having this one patched today, right? So you take those things into consideration and it helps you to make that prioritization done. Now on the second side, I'm going to pick on Security Onion, which is a super awesome tool. It's a Linux distribution that's got all sorts of security tools in it. Your SOC may use it, or if you're trying to build a SOC, it's a great free way to build up a ton of capabilities. This allowed anyone to run an operating system level command by passing parameters to a URL on the system that's hosting Security Onion. So basically, all bets are off. High confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You can own the system entirely. Attack vector over the network, you just have to be able to get to the Security Onion URL, and game's over. Privilege required, you didn't have to authenticate before you run the command. All these things are really bad. So you're like, well, why isn't this a 10.0? Why did this one end up a 9.8? Scope. And this is where scope can get really confusing. Because Security Onion is the entire distribution, the entire OS, the entire everything, scope for that to change would have to escape to the firmware of the PC that's running it or something like that, or into the virtual machine hypervisor or something. So the scope doesn't change because you're owning the entire OS as it is. It's tough to get a bigger scope from that out of any vulnerability, any single vulnerability, I'll say. So thus this guy's a 9.8. If you're running Security Onion, hope you've patched against it, or maybe, again, maybe you have mitigating factors that make this thing less of a big deal. So kind of seeing a little bit of a difference of how these things are scored and how it can help you to prioritize. So now I'm going to talk about NHS. This is the name used for all the public health services in the UK. It's really all of the different hospitals and clinics and things like that that are government controlled that run this. If you recall, in 2017, right, was that 2017? Yeah, good grief. So last spring, this was a big deal. This was WannaCry. This is the vulnerability that brought them down. And this is the vulnerability that brought a lot of people down, actually. Now you're saying, okay, this is an 8.1. If you look at the scores, that makes it to high. It doesn't make it to critical. You see that all the impacts are really high. The exploitable matrix, network exploitable, no privileges required, no user interaction. Scope change is unchanged, again, because this is hitting the operating system level itself. So it's very uncommon for there to be a scope change in something that's attaching the operating system. So you got that little thing that's keeping it from being a 10.0. Also, Microsoft, for whatever reason, when they published this, they said the attack complexity is high. And I don't get that. And again, this is where, too, you have to understand and be paying attention to these things, because this was the Eternal Blue exploit that was written by the NSA, or excuse me, Equation Group perhaps attributable to the NSA, high NSA. And there was exploit code out there, right? This was in the wild when Microsoft released their vulnerability. So, but even if that one had made it over to high, you see this one would have still only ever made it to 9.8 because that scope isn't going to change. So that's why you can't just be looking for the 10.0s to fix. You have to be looking at the other things and why it really matters. So here's the timeline. This exploit was the SMB exploit, so it required hitting a sys share or Windows file share. Required you to be able to access the vulnerable system over port 135 or 139 or 445. NHS had these exposed to the internet. Most of us don't. If you do, go home and fix it because you've probably already been compromised 14 ways to Monday. So they had that open. The vulnerability was disclosed by Microsoft on March 14th. The patch, they disclosed at the same time that they disclosed patches almost all the time. The public exploit code made it out that day, right? And the attack commenced on May 12th, 2017. So 2 months. They had 2 months to patch. They paid attention to all these things. They could have done a couple of things, right? One, they could have patched their systems. Two, they could have shut off being access to those ports from over the internet. So the attack commenced on May 12th. Everything in the UK fell to pieces. The numbers that I've read is 19,000 people missed appointments, diverted ambulances. Were there deaths directly attributable to the WannaCry attack and the fact that it crashed all these UK computer systems? None that I've seen. Doesn't mean people had a very good day because of it. And it took them over a week before they could really get any of the processes back going through system restores and things like that to get going. So WannaCry was a pretty big deal simply because they looked at this vulnerability and they didn't act on it quick enough. So now the attribution question. So Hidden Cobra, a really cool name for a hacker group that's attributable to North Korea. That's who everybody says did this. They're saying, well, this was North Korea running this attack. Could it have been? Absolutely. The people who figure out that attribution stuff and are willing to publish articles on it, give them a lot of credit because I'm never comfortable with attribution. But could it have been the script kiddie sitting in his basement who knew how to install Metasploit framework on his computer? Yeah. He just had to load the module and run an attack. This is not a hard thing to do. And this was available the day that the vulnerability was disclosed. So you think about that and you pay attention to this threat landscape and the vulnerabilities that are out there and the exploits that are out there. This should have moved a lot of people to act a lot quicker than they did. Now when NHS happened and things like that, people started to act on it. Not quite enough because then NotPetya happened a couple months later with Docs and going through the Ukraine, which was again spread by people still not having patched this even after what happened in the UK. So vulnerability prioritization and mitigation, there's a lot of things you have to do in business. These were big deals. And it would have saved the UK a lot of trouble, a lot of people around the world a lot of trouble. Next one is Equifax. Bunch of talks mention these guys because they're easy to beat up on a little bit. The US credit reporting service that all of us use whether we like it or not. The Equifax point of breach. This is the vulnerability that brought Equifax out. Hooray, we got a 10.0, right? So this one was a 10.0 when it was released. Every little one of these notches is as bad as it could possibly be. So Struts is a middleware server released by the Apache Foundation. It's used in a lot of web frameworks, a lot of web platforms. They had this configured in a way that the Struts framework was accessible over the internet. Again, did they patch? Well, here's the timeline. The 0 day was informed by Cisco Talos. So Cisco published that there were people exploiting this on March 7th, 2 days before an official patch was able to be released by the Apache framework. So this is one of those things where a 0 day is a bad thing, and it could have been a lot worse for people. So that patch was disclosed from Apache. At that point, people quickly reverse engineered it. That exploit made it up to exploit DB that same day, right? So really you had a 2 day window here where you could have been exploited by this patch and had a pretty good excuse. I didn't know it was there, and there was nothing I could do about it, right? You had that pretty good excuse. Now, this next one I had to change. So all the things that I've read said that they started to get attacked on mid-May, so a couple months later, right? And then Krebs tweeted a couple days ago that it happened 3 days after the vulnerability was released. He usually has pretty good data, so maybe they really had 3 days to patch, or maybe they had a couple months. In either case, they're a gigantic credit reporting agency in the United States. This Struts vulnerability, if you pay attention to any security news whatsoever, was being discussed. You didn't know it wasn't out there. They had an opportunity to make the patch, and if they looked at it, wow, this is a 10.0 for Struts. Wow, I have Struts accessible from the internet. I should probably do something about this. They really could have done that. They didn't discover the attack, you know, that nice dwell time that we talk about for even a couple more months until the end of July. Stock tanked pretty quickly, wish I'd shorted them then, because, anyway. The CEO, CIO, CISO all retired, right? And we know what that means in a case like this, is that they were forced out for what they did, and they probably got golden parachutes. But whatever, they're out, they lost their jobs. Some of them got insider trading charges for knowing that they were exploited, and someone had taken over their systems before they disclosed it to the public and decided to sell their stock off so that they could sell it when it was still at 142 and not 92. You get in trouble for that usually. And the estimate is at about a $600 million cost to Equifax. Now, whether it was 3 months or 3 days that they had to patch, had they done the vulnerability prioritization and taken a look at that, the 3 of them could have saved their jobs. A lot of their shareholders could be a lot less upset by having it drop down to 92. I think it's back up to like 110 or something now. They cost their companies $500 million. All of this is a pretty big deal just by not paying attention to CVSS scores and knowing how it impacts your system. Right, so Equifax attribution. Could it have been an APT group? I haven't seen anybody attribute Equifax to anyone. This APT 35 is Iran. I thought the logo was super cool, so I grabbed it. Or could it have been, you know, your script kiddie, your ERE just sitting there? Absolutely. It was in the Metasploit framework the day after that vulnerability was released. You just type a couple commands to find a server that's running Struts using Shodan, type a couple commands in the Metasploit framework, and you got their server, right? Now, of course, Equifax layered a bunch of other things because that server had all sorts of data on it. They had a flat network. They had all sorts of other bad practices that made this way worse than just some Struts exploit should have really done. But it wasn't hard to be exploited. Anybody could have done this. I'll pick on my kid again. He could have done this from sitting in front of his iPad. This really doesn't take a lot of skill, but it's these types of things that just paying a little bit of attention to the CVSS can help with, and can help with understanding how to mitigate it. So then we have the buts, right? Okay, it's a vendor system, we have to rely on them, they won't let us patch. What do? Start contracting them to make them patch. When you have somebody, when you're renegotiating a contract with a company who's providing a critical service for you, get with your legal people, get with whoever's negotiating that contract, and make them put KPIs or SLAs and all sorts of things in there for patching their components. That's the only really way to make it these vendors' problems and to make them be on your side. Escalate the need. Call your security contacts. Have someone in your company, your COO, call their COO. Do whatever you can to get them to be aware of this and to help you solve the problem that they've introduced into your network. Make them feel your pain. It's annoying to call someone up every day and say, hey, you gotta patch it, hey, you gotta patch it, hey, you gotta patch it, hey, you gotta patch it. But you know, you hear that enough times and maybe you actually deliver something. So you make it their pain as well. Or you find ways to mitigate, which I'll talk about in a second. What if you don't have time? We all have a billion things to do on our job and not a billion hours. Well, maybe find time. I would guess that if Equifax or NHS had found the time to take care of those vulnerabilities before they got popped, that was a lot less costly in the amount of time than the converse was when they didn't patch and they had to spend all this time remediating. And what about these wonderful systems that are business critical, that are unsupported? Your system that's running Windows XP connected to a Windows 95 machine with maybe Server 2000 behind it, connected to a Postgres 1.0 database. I don't know. You've probably got something crazy like that. find a way to separate it, find a way to retire it really is the only fix. You've got to find a way to get rid of these things. We have to kill these little backdoors in our networks if we're going to really make ourselves secure. And again, escalate the need. Show your executive that what the impact can be of not taking care of these systems. And we have so many examples out there that you can use to prove this to them. So what about mitigation ideas, right? Well, you got your firewall, segment things off, block any port that's not necessary. If there's an admin page, make sure that that's not available from the internet, make sure it's only available from the internet. You got your IPSs and your web application firewalls. A lot of them will take the feeds straight from things like ExploitDB or Rapid7 with Metasploit and everything like that, and they will have the signatures built in to at least stop those easily downloadable, easily scripted attacks right there. Of course, as long as it's actually in prevent mode and not just sitting there watching. But if you set that up, you can buy yourself a little bit more time to patch. You don't have to jump and panic within the next 3 days of that Struts 10.0 coming out. You bought yourself some time to say, okay, I know that attack vector is going to be blocked by my prevention system. I can wait another week and make sure I get a little bit more coordinated response and testing. Strong authentication helps, right? Two-factor authentication into things. A lot of these things might be exploitable through just a low level of access, just a general user access. Well, make sure it's not a bad password. Make sure you have two-factor on it. Run anti-malware on these systems. Maybe it will pick up that process, that rogue process that fired off, and give you an extra chance to mitigate it before everything ends. And of course, right in the middle, I always recommend Panic. That's also fun to do. Air gap it, right? If that Server 2000 system connected to Windows 95 and XP and Postgres 1.0, put it somewhere else and make somebody walk into a room to deal with it. When it becomes painful for them, then maybe they'll find a way to, oh, we do need to upgrade this system because I'm tired of walking into that little locked room and dealing with that old keyboard that's really loud when I type on it, right? Do things like that. Try and make it their pain so that way you can get it mitigated. Right? So the summary, whether you're dealing with the APTs, your nation-state actors, your organized crime people, or whether you're dealing with the EREs, the script kiddie, the 400-pound hacker, whatever, patching solves a lot of problems. Okay, ignoring passwords, patching solves a lot of problems. 0 days do happen, but they're not 0 days for long. They become patchable really quickly. That Struts one is a great example. Within 2 days, after that was announced as a 0 day, there was a patch available. Wasn't really a 0 day anymore because you had a patch, you had a way to fix it. Patching solves a lot. Understanding those CABSS scores and understanding how it applies to your environment, your network, your systems, your applications can help you figure out what you need to do right now and what can wait a couple weeks. Patch it. And then pay attention to your bulletins. All these things are free. US CERT is free. SANS, Internet Storm Center. Take a look, either subscribe to their emails or look at their RSS feed or their bulletins. They talk about all this stuff. It's a gigantic resource to knowing what's going on out there, what you can protect yourself from, and what you should protect yourself from. And then know your surface area, right? That 8.9 may not be an 8.9 for you, but that 6.4 may be a 10.0 for you, depending on how you have things configured. So there's really no substitute for knowing your network, knowing your environment, knowing your inventory, and what impact those things have on your environment. And then my summary episode 2, right? Sticking with the memes, keep calm and patch all the things. So that's all I had. Any questions from anybody? I talked a lot there. Alex, you got a question? All right. 8-year-old doesn't have a question. All right. No questions. Thanks for your time. I have